All right, so regular readers and viewers of this news outlet are very well aware that for the last few years, we've been cracking down on the issue of judicial leniency, of judges in the Palmetto State who give lenient treatment to violent criminals, basically letting people free who ought to be behind bars. Now, this week, the South Carolina General Assembly, which is the entity responsible for screening, approving, and then ultimately voting on judges, had an opportunity to do something about the problem. They had an opportunity through their exclusive authority. Again, the legislature basically controls the judicial branch here in South Carolina, one of only 2 states that does it this way. Had an opportunity this week to do something about this long-standing problem. And I want to pose a question to you. How many contested judicial races do you think lawmakers got to vote on this week? In other words, of all these judges who've been behaving badly, all the potential races to replace them, how many of those races do you think there was a choice other than the same old, the same judge? Zero. Nearly 24 judicial races today at the South Carolina State House. 24 races. 0 contested races. 0 choice. And people, I don't have to, this is a pretty basic point. If there's no choice, there's no accountability. If there's nowhere else to go, you're stuck with the same old. And in South Carolina, whether it's spending, whether it's schools, whether it's roads, whether it's all these things that government's into that it shouldn't be into, like ports or utilities or hospital systems, once again, nothing is changing. And again, those things I just mentioned, they're all political issues and they matter a great deal, but this is life or death. This is life or death. And I want to tell you about just one of the judges who got a free ride today. I want to tell you about this guy. His name's Daniel Hall. He's from the 16th Circuit up in York County, South Carolina. Now, this is a guy who for years has been pilloried by prosecutors, by law enforcement, as a guy who just lets judges out. In fact, there was a sheriff about 4 years ago who said that the criminals in his jail literally line up on the day that they know he's on the bench because they want to appear before him. They want to plead guilty before him because they know he's going to let them off. Again, is that a justice system? Anyway, I want to tell you a little bit about Judge Hall. All right, in 2015, a case was brought before him where a woman buried her dead newborn child. A drug-addled woman buried her newborn child, lived only a few hours. Could have gone to jail for 5 years. He gives her probation. And then 2 years later, when she violates that probation, she comes back before him. He lets her go again. 2 years later, an 11-year-old boy pushes his little sister out of the way of his oncoming car, gets mowed down by this vehicle. The driver then flees the scene. Just a classic hit and run, a fatal hit and run. Again, Judge Hall gives this woman probation, lets her off. The following year, 2018, you got a 61-year-old man, property owner in York County, installs cameras in one of his properties so he can watch women showering and using the restroom. Now, in that case, both the prosecutor and the victim said, this guy needs jail time. Again, Judge Hall gives him probation. But the most egregious case involving this particular judge occurred in January of 2020. Now, on that date, 42-year-old Paul Patrick Johnson Sr., again, a York County man, appeared before Judge Hall. Now, this is a man who was facing a charge of domestic violence of a high and aggravated nature, a felony charge. This is the very highest level domestic violence charge on the books. Now, in addition to that charge, previously, 2 times previously, Johnson had been ordered by judges to stay away from his victim. He refused to do so, not once, but twice, violating court orders. Now, against the advice of prosecutors, of the victim's advocates, and of the victim, Judge Hall lets him go. Lets him go. 3 months later, he murdered his wife, murdered his 5-year-old son, and then turned the gun on himself. That is a judge who was just reelected today by the South Carolina General Assembly, along with a whole slate of other judges. Now again, I'm not saying all of them are that bad, but we are far past a few bad apples. This is a systemic failure. It's a systemic problem, And today, South Carolina Republican lawmakers who claim to be for public safety, who claim to be for victims' rights, who claim to be for individual liberty, they had a chance to do something about it. And guess what? They did nothing. And you want to know why? Because there were no competitive races. And you know why there were no competitive races? Because they handpicked their cronies to stay on the bench.